Welcome to Transcending Comics, a podcast dedicated to trans representation in comic books, manga, and webtoons, both on panel and behind the scenes. I'm your host, Tommy, and returning to our show today is writer and editor from Lifeline Comics, Algy. Algy has previously worked as an editor on comics like By Visibility, Still By, and Transphoria, a trans and non-binary comic anthology, and he's even had comics featured in both books. His upcoming comic, Ozma, The Trans Witch of Oz, #1, will be his first full-length comic, and it's currently live on Kickstarter for just a couple more days. The book takes place in the Ever Afterverse of Lifeline Comics, alongside books like The Witches of Oz, Beast in Snow, and Nightmare in Wonderland. So he'll be adding to a wonderful tapestry of new, not-safe-for-work twists on classic fantasy titles and fairy tales. With no further ado, I'm excited to welcome back to the show, Algy. Thanks for joining us, man.
Thank you for having me. As mentioned, I've talked with Tommy previously, and it is always fantastic to be here. Big fan of you as a person, writer, interviewer. Aww. Always pleasant to be here.
Yeah, and this feels kind of full circle. Like, back in June when Kat and Phil were on for Aces and Arrows, I believe this show was the first place they announced Ozma of Oz, so very excited to have the writer on to come back and bring it up. Sorry I didn't catch it earlier in the campaign.
Yeah, all good. Campaigning schedules always are crazy, and I appreciate you taking the time to talk about Ozma with us and help spread that name out and the exciting project.
But I know this is kind of a big leap, going from working mainly as an editor and having like some writing roles on short fiction, but like, how's it feel to have your first full-length comic under your belt and a fully funded campaign at that? That's still growing at the time of recording?
It feels so fantastic, but while creating it, it wasn't just like, oh, how do I go from writing short fiction to longer fiction? It was, how do I keep this long story contained into the page count we had set? I feel like that's always a writer's problem, of figuring out just how to pace things, how to space things, especially for a comic when it is so visual and you have to keep things like the number of panels on a page in mind and what the artist can accomplish working with an artist. There were drafts of this that were far beyond the page count that was reasonable. So trying to make sure you're telling a fulfilling story, you're telling the story you want to tell, and just making sure you could fit it all into this book is 44 pages, so the 44 pages that we had. And it felt really good to be able to tell this kind of longer graphic novel length story. Short fiction is fun, where you have usually 6 to 8 pages in my previous work to really throw a reader in, introduce them to a character and problem right away, get some sort of conflict and emotional tie involved, and then give something that is emotionally satisfying by the end. That's always very fun and very quick in the short scale projects. For this, I was able to have a lot more time to sit with the characters and sit with the conflicts, sit with some of the larger themes involved. I'll actually give a little plot summary of Ozma, just in case anybody listening isn't familiar. It takes place in that world of Oz, and in this Ever Afterverse universe, in the Witches of Oz story, that Ozma is a spin-off off of. Oz has gone into chaos since Dorothy left, and in Ozma's city, there is an evil lord who has hoarded all the magic of the town. People are hungry, people are sick, people are suffering, so war is basically about to break out, and Ozma has some difficult choices to make, and she has some complex relationships with a lot of people in town. So those are some of the main conflicts you have to deal with, and for 44 pages, that's a lot to deal with. So it felt very good to have the space to sit with long conversations between characters. I think that's my favorite part of it being a larger scale story. There is room for pages, multiple pages of characters being able to talk and have action that something like a 6 to 8 page story won't give you the exact amount of time for.
Now, I know the first 7 pages are up on Kickstarter, and they work really well as like, if this were a webtoon, it'd be a perfect first chapter. It ends at like a very intriguing moment that makes me want to keep going. So in making this huge jump to like 6 pages to many times that length, did y'all ever approach it like in 6 to 8 pages at a time, as if it was like a bunch of small comics or small chapters, or was it like a much more big picture scene of like, we have 44, here's what each page needs to do?
The great thing about working with Phil and Kat from Lifeline, they are so organized and experienced with it. So we had our plotting session before then, and we knew it was going to be, I think actually it was supposed to be 40 pages, and we were plotting. So we were talking about what scenes we wanted, what characters we wanted, and then trying to order it. And each time we put it in essentially a bullet pointed list, we had to estimate right then and there what the page count would be, so we would not lose track of it. And also keep in mind, like, we could not have 3 scenes back to back that's just talking. We want to make sure we're putting in the fun action you expect to see in Ever Afterverse, which is a fairy tale retelling. You want to make sure you're getting character moments at the same time you're getting action, or making sure like the pacing makes sense. So through that organization, it was very useful to be able to see exactly what the scenes are, how they flow together, and eventually, well, it was difficult when it was difficult to fit it all into 40 pages. We pushed it to 44. So we are very conscientious while we're working towards and plotting what scenes we want. And I'm so glad it did work out so well for the Kickstarter. I agree that 7-page preview, I think, gives a great intro to the character herself, as well as the situation that she's set up in. You see her as a healer, you see her interacting with some very important characters and just kind of the tensions that are building.
Now, I would love to know about your history with the world of Oz, but more specifically, Ozma herself. Like, I mean, I only know about the character because of all the references elsewhere, like in Galaxy, the Prettiest Star, and other nods to it, and like any kind of trans fantasy fiction. But like, how did you come to know the character in this world?
Strangely enough, I think I first learned of her, or at least my first time I started looking into her. I probably have come across her earlier. Amy Schneider, the Jeopardy star, icon. I am a big Jeopardy fan, and I love her. And she has Ozma tattooed on her arm. And I don't remember what conversation I was having, but somebody gave me the Ozma lore. And I am a very big fan of older fiction myself. I am a horror fan specifically, but I do like sci-fi and fantasy stories. And I like older stories. And I'm glad that nowadays we're able to have stories like the Ozma one we're publishing, where things are very explicit. But because I grew up very attached to things with a lot of subtext and allegory, I felt very attached to Ozma because of the allegory attached to her in the original L. Frank Baum books. So with the original Oz books, the first one, Wizard of Oz, most people know. And in the second one, we follow the protagonist, who's a young boy named Tip, goes on a lot of different adventures with his friends throughout the book. And then at the end, it's discovered that Ozma is the rightful princess of Oz, and she was hidden away and magicked away when she was a baby. Nobody knows where she is, and Glinda reveals that this protagonist, Tip, was actually transformed into the boy, and he's actually Ozma, and there's a little conversation about it, and he's like, oh, I don't know about that. What are you talking about? He has some reservations, and when they transform Tip back into Ozma, to an authentic self, a truer self, there's a very sweet and I think very authentic moment with her friends that I think is why a lot of trans and queer people feel attached to it. It says something like, oh, Tip, or who has now been transformed into Ozma, says something like, oh, I hope none of you will care less for me than you did before. I'm just the same Tip, only, and it's cut off. And one of the friends is just like, oh, you're only different. And everyone, the comment attached to it is, and all the friends still loved and accepted her. And I think that kind of authenticity that queer people are able to love and attach themselves to, the way we're able to, I don't know, find that connection in older stories is what really attracts me to Ozma. That's book that is published from like, I think 1909. And just seeing a character like that who was quite literally assigned a gender that was lived wrongfully for most of her life, and then to kind of hesitantly come into herself and be accepted by her community. I think that's where people get really attached to it, and that was always her intrigue for me. And I definitely had to get more involved with the original books, which I were less familiar with. I was definitely more familiar of the legacy of Ozma than the books themselves. But it was nice having to go back and see even that original conversation between the characters and just seeing why people liked her so much and why she has this decades-long legacy.
Now, I've been really intrigued by Ozma of Oz, but like just haven't had the kind of reading time to dive into the whole Wizard of Oz book series. I tried a collected audio edition and kind of tapped out a few chapters into the Wizard of Oz. In your opinion, like, can people jump right into Ozma books, or like, do you kind of need that greater context of whatever happens in the previous ones?
The first one is, I believe, pretty standard Wizard of Oz. That is one I had read years ago, so I didn't do much brushing up on it besides like scrolling through the free PDF that exists. But jumping into the second book, that's really where you're going to get the Ozma background, but that doesn't appear until way later toward the end of the story. And then there are about, I think, 14 Oz books in total. So you could absolutely skip around. There's probably going to be some details you're missing, but a lot of the times when Ozma pops up, it is to save Dorothy, or they always have some sort of cute relationship popping up that we try and play with in the comic too, because I'm really fascinated by that kind of relationship that they would have, which was also interesting for writing this book, just because Ozma does exist as a spin-off to the other Lifeline Witches of Oz series. So there are pre-existing characters like Dorothy that we wanted to put some intriguing lore into. Dorothy's a bit of a mystery in the original Ever Afterverse story, so we wanted her to both be kind of somebody important from Ozma's past, who she's still really attached to, because we wanted to work that in from the original books where you see Ozma and Dorothy interacting a lot, but we also wanted to keep that intrigue. So in this book, you're actually going to see her as kind of a legend for some of the rebel fighters in this story who see Dorothy as this kind of legendary figure. But yeah, back to your original question about those books, you could definitely, there's a lot going on in those books, and different books, I think, focus on different characters. There are 14 in total. You could definitely seek out the things you want. I definitely recommend going toward the end of that second book just to see that kind of transformation of Ozma, especially because it is such a interesting trans allegory. I think some people who don't obviously pick it up might be like, oh, but if she was born a girl and becomes a boy and then goes back to girl, like, what's the message there? It's like, allegorically, I think the emotions do. Trans people absolutely would align with that, with finding your more authentic self and being able to live happier, because Tip was a very unpleasant character throughout most of that book. I think you said you started it, right?
I didn't get to book 2. I tapped out in The Wizard of Oz.
Very valid. Tip is very typical little bratty for a protagonist. So author definitely has a lot of fun with it. But getting that end conversation about Ozma and the transformation was very affirming. I think people would like that.
I'll kick myself if I don't circle back to Jeopardy's iconic Amy Schneider. And I will always appreciate her for her impact on trans people elsewhere. Mainly, my girlfriend was working at Dillard's and Men's Warehouse while Amy was on Jeopardy, and you get a lot of old customers there. And thank God for Amy, because she gave a very wholesome and not even very cringe way for older people to finally relate to trans folk. They'd see my girlfriend, they're like, oh, we love Amy on Jeopardy, and that was what they had. And I've known old people, they don't always have something that sweet and wholesome to connect with us on, or a first question or talking point. So thank you, Amy.
Yeah, I will admit I haven't kept up with Amy throughout non-Jeopardy excursions, but same thing, because I think I was pretty young when I first started seeing that, so even that kind of exposure to trans representation, very memorable for me, and very comforting.
That's an audience that I don't think gets a ton of trans representation. There's just so many people that watch Jeopardy, a lot of them older, and to have someone just show up, kick a ton of ass, and just be a very fun, cool presence, and give Ken Jennings a run for their money. Yeah, wonderful. But I am curious though about the connection to the Ever Afterverse with this, and how that impacted your writing style here. I know how cumbersome it can be in one of the big 2 comics, having a tapestry of superheroes and 60 years of lore you have to work with. Here I know it's a lot less that, but I imagine there are still plot beats or other elements of the world they want to tie into the Witches of Oz, and maybe even other Ever Afterverse appearances and crossovers. So what kind of mandates and guidelines do you have going into the writing process for Ozma?
Yes, definitely at the beginning, especially during that planning stage, trying to figure out the rules previously established, because we don't want to deal with plot holes. We don't want to confuse any readers who are, we appreciate coming back for later in the series. So entering, I wanted to be oh, what are the rules of magic? Because I really wanted this ruler hoarding resources storyline that I wanted the characters to have to deal with. So I wanted to make sure I wasn't going to conflict with any of their stories with that. And it's very interesting to deal with the lore of Dorothy and keeping her as a mysterious figure, having her in flashbacks, having her as a symbol for our characters and what kind of ideals they want to have, how they want to interact with their setting, what they want Oz, their city, to look like. Uh, she was interesting to have as lore, given the Witches of Oz lore that has been established in the Witches of Oz books. Everything was going great in Oz, and then Dorothy left, and now everything's in chaos. So I wanted to keep those elements while expanding on it, especially because Ozma and Dorothy were going to have a relationship, not necessarily romantic, but the way they interact and how integral that was for Ozma's own uh, character development, her transition and ability to accept herself. That's touched upon in the book. So that was interesting lore to add. And just keeping in mind the whole Ever Afterverse, what I wanted to, or what I did always revisit in their other scripts from the Ever Afterverse while writing this, because I wanted to stay true to tone, themes, what I thought fans of the Ever Afterverse might want from this book. Those were big things I wanted to pay attention to, just the kind of style, the kind of magic that people like to see, the kind of relationships they like to see. Most of the Ever Afterverse stories, if people aren't familiar, center two characters who are having some sort of developing romantic relationship based off other fairy tale characters. There's, Beast and Snow, Nightmare in Wonderland with Sleeping Beauty and Alice from Wonderland. We have a Little Mermaid story and The Wishes of Oz, of course. So wanting to keep that in mind, keep those complex relationships that are complicated and interesting and have interesting themes. I definitely wanted to stay on the right tone while writing Ozma to make sure it fit right into that universe while still being a standalone. You don't have to touch the others. And we hope that Ozma could provide enough context for the world of Oz without you having to have already seen Witches of Oz.
I revisited your story in Transphoria earlier today, and I noticed this narrative through line between that and the Ozma preview of just like focusing on a protagonist's access to HRT and like how that's impacting their life. And in this case, like using this idea of like using magic to transition in a world where magic is running out or it's being hoarded by those in power. So I'm curious how early in the process of like working on an Ozma story and like a canonically trans character that like this idea of magic as HRT came to be.
Uh, that was one of the first like images I had of it. It as a plot point definitely came the more we were talking about it, but uh, just kind of the idea of her wand as the HRT tool, the needle. I love that image. I definitely wanted that to be included, but the more we started developing the plot, we knew it was going to be about conflict, about magic as a resource being hoarded. I wanted to involve HRT as part of that, just because of, as you can see from the Transformer story, it's something that I consider very important. In this story, Ozma, as you can see on the preview, is a healer. So HRT is part of her healing. I view it as healthcare healing. It's an important thing that it's important to people. It saves a lot of lives. So I really wanted that to be one of the first images, and that's why I love having it in that opening. It makes it clear that that is an important theme that's carried throughout it. Something I also like to do throughout stories, especially when I'm writing about queer and trans characters. I don't like, or I shouldn't say I don't like, because I love consuming it, but whenever I write a story, I like integrating the trans themes as something that is very much an undercurrent. Like, I've never really written a story where I would say coming out is the main story. I like dealing with the, not aftermath, but all the complicated things that come after itself, things like HRT. I love that process myself. So I love the Transphoria story where I got to write about how HRT is such a beneficial, beautiful thing for a lot of people. And here I liked having it on the first page just because I like showing it as a important thing for Ozma, something that is considered healing, something that's very important. It's an important resource. And it would be something that when you're thinking about as the story goes on, as resources start dissipating, you start thinking about where power is, like that's something that's going to affect people. So just having that sort of like ongoing trans inclusion and including those themes throughout a story is always very important to me. Definitely feel like most stories I include or involve HRT. I know that's not always a part of every trans person's journey, and some people like starting their medical transition and going off it. People go on and off all the time, but that kind of the beauty that it has personally given me is something I like to touch on a lot in stories.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really love the touch of like the sparkle in her face being the first thing she noticed. And I'm like, oh yeah, no, if I had magic HRT, the beard shadow touch up would be the first thing addressed. I mean, it was like the first thing I learned makeup for how to do something about it. So I'm like, yep, this checks out. Love it.
Because I transitioned the other way, I did have to do more research. I starting this because I wanted to make sure I was, accurate and I had the complete I was going the opposite way. So I wanted to make sure I was getting all the right information. So it was very, very fun to read firsthand accounts of people's other people's, affirming journeys with their transitions and medical transitions.
Yeah, like, was that much of a challenge for you as a trans mask writer, like approaching a story from a trans femme mindset? Or like, how did you, I don't know, go about channeling that and like making sure everything kind of lined up with the trans femme experience?
I like reading firsthand accounts, so definitely was diving on Reddit to see people ask what questions were coming up from them and how people responded. I think a lot of there are a lot of common themes between just having a trans identity, the kind of acceptance you feel, the kind of problems you have in complex relationships it might have with people from your family and from people you might come across. So I think those things might be more universal, whether you're trans mask or trans femme. But for other things like this kind of more medical transition, I absolutely needed to be reading firsthand accounts because I don't have much experience, like knowing the ways one could get estrogen or the kind of effects, the kind of timelines they have. Testosterone is one powerful hormone, so everything with when I started my HRT, very quick, very aggressive in a beautiful way for me. So reading about how estrogen and the different methods people use, that was a lot of fun research for me.
As far as that, like, walking the line and being tasteful about the approach and the depictions, like, something I really associate Lifeline Comics with is my introduction to not safe for work comics and like full length ones with proper stories. Like, I think my assumption when I see the not safe for work tag, thanks to social media, is like, this is going to be focusing on the sexual elements. Like, those are going to be front and center, if not gratuitous. When in reality, like, all of the Lifeline NSFW comics I've read so far have been very plot focused. It's just like when physical interactions or romantic intimacy is present, they don't have to shy away from the sexual aspect. Or like, hey, we can tell a good story that happens to have boobs in it. It's not, here is a reason for us to show boobs. And I think internet comics have kind of skewed people's perspective on that. But yeah, I've always thought it's been very tasteful in how it's been depicted. But this, from what I know, is the first time they've done a trans not safe for work comic or one in the Ever Afterverse. So like, how did you learn to walk that line as far as like having a tasteful amount of sexual content and like not doing anything that might feel exploitative of trans bodies?
That was absolutely ongoing conversations that we were having with us as editors and writers and with artists because we don't want anything to come off like exploitative or like the fetishizing that does harm to trans women and trans femme people that we know exists. We see it online. There are a lot of toxicity online that we try our best to be aware of, and we wanted to make sure that we treated this like the other Ever Afterverse books where we have these characters, we have a main conflict, main story going on, and these characters have this romantic and sexual tension. So we want this sex scene in there. One of the other main characters in the book is Ginger. She's leading an army of revolt. I love this character so much. She is, I loved her design so much. She's a butch lesbian. I love her. And she has this, there's sex and nudity involved with her and Ozma, and just trying to write not just what I think came out to be a very beautiful and engaging sex scene between two very complicated relationship. Like, write that beautiful sex scene in the midst of a very character-driven story and character and conflict forward conversation. So we didn't, while we were trying to be aware of not wanting to be exploitative, not wanting to perpetuate stereotypes against trans bodies in any way, we also wanted to make sure we were treating it like the other books in that this is our protagonist. We have beautiful art of her, beautiful character design. So we're able to include and highlight her in a beautiful and sexual light in a way that matches the other books, matches with our other female heroes. And we're very proud of the way that it was written. I think she came across a very strong character. And I love all of our cover artists. They were able to do beautiful depictions. The cover art is some of my favorite part of these projects just because all the variants, they're so beautiful and they come in different styles. One of my favorite parts of comics is just seeing how different artists take different stories because no artist draws the same.
Hmm.
So being able to see Ozma, we have a lot of not safe for work covers and those variants. So seeing how everyone takes her, we have some pinup styles. We also have uh, cool, more flowy, magical pinup styles, but big fan of the different takes on it and wanting to treat Ozma authentically and beautifully the way she was as a protagonist.
I've noticed online, like in online circles that are kind of meant for like asking good faith questions to the transgender community, I'll often see these well-meaning men and boyfriends being like, "Hey, I'm getting to a point with my girlfriend where things are getting sexual, and like I don't know how to approach this. So, like, I'm okay with everything, but like, how do I do this?" And always the top recommendation is like, communicate, talk to her about it. We're not a monolith. Everyone is different about what they're comfortable with. Did y'all have an opportunity here to like depict that kind of conversation in the comic, or is there enough history between Ozma and Ginger that like they're very well familiar with the sexual dynamic that they most fit?
It is definitely more of the latter. They're closer to exes. It definitely comes off more of a situationship type of scenario. So they didn't get to have that kind of conversation that you definitely see people asking for advice for. But you're absolutely right that that would be a fantastic thing to see communicated in a comic book, especially in a genre story like this. That would be such a very beautiful and real conversation to see included. Definitely something you, very good writer, should be keeping in mind and should wanting to include. But yeah, for these characters, it definitely made more sense that the sex scene in this book is definitely more of a spur of the moment.
Hmm.
Tensions are rising in all aspects of their lives, and they have a past that leads up to it. But that's definitely a conversation I was reading about while trying to do research on trans femme experiences and HRT and the effects of all of that.
I'm sure Transphoria is going to get a volume 2 someday. So if we need a Ozma prequel to fit in there somewhere, I think we have some awesome subject matter now that might be perfect for that book. Now, with the movie coming out just like in a couple months, I would be remiss if I didn't at least ask about your thoughts on Wicked and how you're feeling about the upcoming part 2 and like, you know, just the association of Oz and this, like the timing's kind of perfect between these two properties.
Oh, Phil's gonna be so sad he's not here. That's his favorite movie. Phil watches Wicked at least once a week. I've never seen that man board a plane and not watch the entire thing. Uh, so he's set the bar for me for like love of Wicked. I just because it's so hard to reach, fall slightly behind that, but I really enjoyed that movie. I was a big fan of the musical growing up.
Mm.
Luckily, I'm from New York, so I was able to go to Broadway and actually see it. It was beautiful. I really enjoy Cynthia Erivo's voice. I think everyone can agree that she is one of the most powerful presences and voices ever. And as a musical theater fan, I'm very easily impacted by music and just that kind of power that she has. So I'm very excited about the upcoming book. In the first Wicked movie, if I'm remembering correctly, at the school, they're doing just kind of background noise announcements at the school and they're listing professors. And one of them was Ozma. And Phil and I were like, name drop. Like I was just like a little Easter egg, but I'm sure very few members of the audience heard that. But it was fun to hear little things just because I've been doing a lot of Wizard of Oz research for this. I got way more familiar with this kind of franchise and the lore material than I'd ever been before. So then seeing the Wicked movie come out for the first time definitely increased my enjoyment and definitely increased my excitement for the second one. So I'm very excited to see it and look for more Easter eggs that I would not have been catching before.
I'm cautiously optimistic just because like all of my favorite songs from that show are in the first half. And like
Yes, that is the fear.
musicals across the board, like Act 2, I just don't usually like as much as the first one. The one exception being Cats, which is very much a guilty pleasure of mine, but that doesn't have like a plot it has to worry about. So they can just backload it with Mr. Mistopheles and Skimbleshanks, and I will name all of them if I have to. But yeah, so like I'm assuming like we're gonna get Defying Gravity and others again. I'm not like, I don't know if they're going to do original songs, like how they're going to stretch out part 2, but
Yeah,
I hope they find a way to make it work.
absolutely. Yeah, that was a big concern just because the first act has most of the iconic songs. I was always a really big fan of what was it, No Good Deed Goes Unpunished, and that's in the second act. So
Mm.
that could keep me going on hype alone. But no, you're right. I hope they do include original music, and just stylistically, that movie did a lot. That it was a, it was enjoyable throughout it. I uh, am definitely somebody who doesn't like when movies pad out the runtime unnecessarily, and I did not feel that way while watching the first Wicked. So happy to see the second one coming.
This is the first time that I've thought this was actually a good move on the part of the studio, just because, like, when I think of Wizard of Oz, like, the first half of Wicked sets up everything you need for the start of the Wizard of Oz without, like, getting in too deep on any of these. You just, like, now relate to the witch a little bit more. And plus, like, I don't know, if it bombs or if the second one sucks, like, we have the first one. We have all the favorite songs there, and it doesn't have to be 4 hours long or condense half the show into one reasonably length movie. So, like, I didn't like it 4 out of 5 times when they did it to young adult novels, but for once, I'm like, you know what? I think I'm behind this. I really dig this first half, and it's the part of the musical I like. So let's see more of this.
I feel like if they tried to fit both acts into one 3 to 4 hour long movie, next to nobody would have preferred that.
Now, outside of Wicked, do you have any other favorite adaptations or interpretations of Oz or the world of Oz?
Ooh, that's a good question. I'll have to think about that.
My girlfriend just showed me Return to Oz last year, which my parents protected me from as a kid because I don't think any child should have to see that. But
Was
as
that
an
the
adult,
James Franco one?
no, thank God. Return to Oz is like that really dark fever dream of an 80s movie where, like, Dorothy gets sent to an
Oh,
asylum
I
and
just Googled it. Yep, I remember this.
okay, yeah, sorry for the repressed memories. I'm just
Very.
giving you back.
I think they showed this during, like, when it was raining outside in my elementary school and that we weren't allowed to go out for recess. They would just play strange old movies from VHSs, and I think that's where I saw this.
I feel like everyone I know who went through the public elementary school system has a movie like that that just has, like, some terrifying stuff in it. There's like The Adventures of Mark Twain is another one kind of like this that has, like, a terrifying claymation scene with Satan in
Oh,
it.
oh.
Like, I think these teachers knew exactly what they were doing. Like, we're going to find the movie that scars these kids the most. They're going to get all hype because they're going to get to watch a movie in school, and we're just going to feed them a plate full of nightmares. And
It
that's
feels
exactly what they did with those.
it feels like a Goosebumps book where it's like, and there's a weird box with VHS tapes that don't exist anywhere else. Cursed children or something.
They're just all the Ring. It's all the Ring VHS tapes, but they don't kill you because that'll be too suspicious, but they will haunt you. And that's all we want because we all resent you.
Yeah. There was one I remember when I was in elementary school. It's called, I think, Thomas Edison, The Wizard of Light. And it was about Thomas Edison, like, adopting an orphan. And I have not been able to find a trace of this anywhere ever, but it's stuck with me. Uh, yeah, completely. That's where that story ends. But yeah, VHS tapes cursed. I see now that I'm looking at Return to Oz. You said your girlfriend introduced this to you.
Yeah.
How did you enjoy it?
As an adult, I love it. Like, I prepared a couple different questions of the week, and one of them would have been, what scene from this movie would you turn into a sexy scene? And I have multiple ideas for that. But yeah, like, as an adult, it rules. Like, it's really dark. It's still just fun and quirky enough for an Oz movie. You will be thinking the whole time, like, why did they make this and show it to children? Like, I would sooner believe Sam Raimi of Evil Dead fame made this one than that crappy Great and Powerful Oz. And I think it rules. The ending's really cool. The villain is just one of the best I've ever seen in a movie. Like, it changes the style of claymation and practical effects as it goes. I want to see that get a musical. Or, like, hey, if y'all want to do a Return to Oz but sexy, I've got ideas. let me send in a pitch.
Like, you want to lean more into the dark than the sexy, return to this, because I am scrolling through these pictures now. I love practical effects. I love old movies like this. These character designs are so fun. Like, that's one of the best parts of adapting anything, just trying to figure out how you want these characters to look and fit into this world. This looks beautiful. Anybody listening to this who hasn't seen Return to Oz, any quick Google search, you'll see some of the most insane stills ever put to film.
Let's see. Dorothy is an adult in this universe, right? In
Yes.
Ever Afterverse.
In the flashbacks, we see her as the younger version, but like the way she's about the same age as Ozma, who is in her 20s throughout the story. So when Ozma knew her, when she was in Oz, she was a younger character, but any amount of talking about, like, she's Ozma's age, but we don't really see her in the present.
Okay, I'll throw these out there because I got to voice these thoughts somewhere, and I'm not just going to hang on to them. But like,
Go for it.
they make their new robot friend TikTok, who needs to be like wound up if he wants to think or to talk or to move. Meaning, you've got the ultimate robot sub right there. There's the pumpkin-headed creature Jack calls Dorothy mom through the whole movie.
Yeah.
I don't need to say anything more. It's all right there. The witch in this one like has different heads she puts on and off. There's stuff to be done there. The gnome king, like the one thing that can destroy him is an egg. Maybe we can read some trans stuff into that. Who knows? Maybe they're just deeply closeted. I'll do that. But no, Return to Oz is a lot of fun, and people absolutely need to dig that up.
Yes, these character designs just look so fun. You could definitely play with a lot of stuff from this.
Yeah. I'm pulling this up because I cannot remember what the third member of the gang is. That
there's Jack Pumpkinhead. I see Tin Man. There's a fantastically stuffed lion, Scarecrow with his crown, and I see the other robot.
Yeah, the Scarecrow is oddly like the scariest thing in the movie. Like just his big old anime eyes just don't look good in real life. Okay, I think it was like a talking moose head gump creature and also a talking chicken. That's the third member. So this is definitely the B side of Dorothy Companions, but there's good stuff here.
I feel like they were digging around the other 14 books for some of those characters, if they exist elsewhere.
Joe Corallo was just on my show, and he was talking about like animated Oz adaptations that were around, or like they had a Wizard of Oz cartoon. I've heard of like some more anime aspects of it. Like they've adapted this in all kinds of things, and I haven't dived into that at all.
Yeah, I was going to bring up Once Upon a Time before, just because that was the first one that came back to memory. Even though I was basically falling off the show as they started touching upon Dorothy in it, but the way Once Upon a Time does adaptations was always so fascinating and so fun and very cool for my teenage mind in development. But I was also very big on prose books. So there was a series I used to love when I was younger, Dorothy Must Die, and that was one of my like babies, first introduction to like dark twists on old stories. So in this book, Dorothy's this kind of, if I remember correctly, like she's the villain, evil character. It was turned into a longer series, but what's fascinating to me about that was just it was my one of the earliest books where it was a dark twist on a story I knew, and just kind of seeing the different ways you could take different characters and getting familiar imagery, especially because I basically knew Wizard of Oz from the movie, seeing how a prose writer can integrate imagery, integrate different emotions and thoughts, and dialogue throwbacks. That's one of my earliest memories of different Oz adaptations. That stuck with me. I'm a big horror fan, like I mentioned, so that was a big one where character who is very idealized and loved is not as sane and fun as our vision of her is. And I think, if I'm remembering correctly, and I apologize if I'm wrong, I have a memory of the Tin Man, like with a bleeding heart or some sort of like gory heart imagery that was related to Tin Man having a heart, and I think that was part of his weakness. Just little character details like that was something one of the main things I really enjoy about adaptations. If you're going to take a weird turn, I like looking for little details like that.
The less well executed version of that comes to my mind is that Chilling Adventures of Sabrina show from Netflix.
Yeah,
I remember in season 3, which is about where the show really starts to take a nosedive, they go into hell. And I think it's kind of like Dante's Inferno that there's like layers of it, but it's also Wizard of Oz for no reason. They have the road they're following. I think there's like a kind of crucified scarecrow at one point. Maybe I'm hallucinating that, but like I do remember thinking like, why is this Wizard of Oz? No one asked for this. This was also about when the show has her join the cheerleading squad and they have these white girls singing It's Tricky. as just like the cheerleaders thing. And as a former cheerleader, that really pissed me off. I'm like, the cheerleaders don't sing. That's what the show choir does. I was in show choir too. It's two different things. God.
So funny. You know, I stopped watching Sabrina after the first season just because I'm very bad at watching TV and I just never went back to it. But I'm
That
intrigued
was
and I might have to just see that. Same with things like Riverdale, which I think Sabrina is then actually like technically a spin-off of Riverdale.
mm,
I saw beginning of Riverdale, and then whenever they announced there was a musical episode and they were suddenly doing Hedwig and the Angry Inch, I'm sitting down for it. I don't know why they did that. It did not fit anything that was happening.
fitting the show never really seemed to be a concern of theirs. Like,
Yeah.
if you had like an AI generate like 10 ideas for Riverdale, I bet all of those are already in there. Like, I think there's a demon shark. Archie becomes a vigilante at some point. Musical episodes multiple times a year. Like, we like this musical. Let's do Heathers. Why not? Like, it's fun. I don't know. It's a show I never had the time for, but wish I did. Or I wish I had some of that teenage TV watching time. I want this to be formative media for me, but
Right.
I missed that boat.
Every time I have ever read something about Riverdale, I can't tell if it's a lie or not. But I'll have to check out Sabrina doing Wizard of Oz and Dante's Inferno.
Now, final real question regarding your progression on the book, going from mainly working as an editor to like going from short fiction to now long fiction. Is it tough for you having like this editor brain, not being too harsh on your own unfinished scripts?
Yes, I think a lot of writers relate to that, whether they have like formative editorial experience or not. It's very easy to get self-critical, so that's why I think it is always great to have either a supportive team or just friends that you could turn to and be like, "So Ozma is in this scene right now, and I need help." But yeah, as an editor, I think like sometimes editor brain has to yell at writer brain to stop focusing on editing because that's what's going to come later. Like I mentioned before, when you're switching from writing something that is only going to be 6 pages to something that might be 44 pages, that gives you a lot of room to take your time with scenes. And really, you kind of just have to force yourself as a writer to write from beginning to end and edit later. That's advice I have received a lot, and it's the number one advice I struggle with because as I'm writing, I think, oh, I want something else to be included earlier. Ozma actually as a healer didn't come until like a second or third draft because I was kind of in the conflicts and all of the conversations she was having with some of the other characters. I needed her to have some other foundation, some other ground for why she feels the way she does about wanting to protect people, what her stance is, how she wants to deal with an army that's coming up, surrounding all of the chaos that's in the city. So just kind of having a little lightning strike moment of, oh, she's a healer, like she cares about protecting people. This is her stance, integrating that into how she interacts with people. That was formative. And that's something that can only come if you keep writing. If you're editing the first scene forever, you're never going to get to the end. So just kind of force yourself to write from beginning to end and trust yourself to edit later. Trust anyone you're working with to help you along the way. Just push yourself toward the end, and the best version of it will be unburied the more you do. There are times even after it's done where I'm like, oh, damn, I should have done this. So there's always going to be improvements you want to make, or even if it's not improvements, just edits that come to mind. So while it's definitely a strength to be a strong editor, if you think you have anybody has a editorial brain and you have that eye, it is good also to just kind of word vomit until you get a story and a path so you know how the story's going to go.
Wrapping things up with our guest tailored question of the week. Got two options in case this first one's in case you don't have a clever answer for the first one. But if you were to naively request or wish for something of the Wizard of Oz, what would it be? And how would the wizard find a cop-out way to grant that to you?
Ooh, that's a good question. Can I hear the second question as well and then try and answer both?
Second one, in case, we couldn't think anything good, was, all right, if you could reinterpret one other classic fairy tale or fantasy story nearing public domain as a trans narrative, what would it be and how would you approach it?
Ooh, both fantastic questions. If I had to think about the wizard granting me something, the first thing that comes to mind is just that I am somebody who at night overthinks and cannot sleep. So I feel I would ask for calm and serenity. And I feel like I just accidentally Rip Van Winkle myself into like into a coma. So
Hmm.
that might not be the most fantastic thing to be wishing for because he is an untrustworthy man. But there are definitely things in public domain that I have thought about and I think about all the time. I'm going to look at my bookshelf real quick and see if I could
Yeah, take your
find
time.
something. I feel like my answer for what I would want to turn into a trans story, just in like most things that had any sort of impact on me growing up. I love just kind of seeing queer allegories and things. I think that's why I'm attracted to horror, just because the monster is always some other. So I really love the H.P. Lovecraft story Reanimator that was then adapted into a
Hmm.
1980s movie. That's not
I'm
nearing public
familiar.
domain. Oh, I love Reanimator. Uh, it has so many trans fans just because Frankenstein as a story is already very queer in of itself and specifically trans, just with the idea of building a body. I think the 1980s movie really attracted a lot of trans fans like that, just in the imagery and just how strange of a protagonist Herbert West is. So, like when I think of licenses, even though the Lovecraft story is definitely public domain by now, the 80s movie just attracts me so much that if I got the opportunity to license that, I absolutely would. But other early, I was very big on serial stories like that. So something I really love is, are you familiar with the character AJ Raffles at all?
No.
Okay. A little bit of lore. If you like Sherlock Holmes at all, Arthur Conan Doyle's brother-in-law, his sister's husband, his name was E.W. Hornung, and he wrote A.J. Raffles as a bunch of short stories because he was such a big fan of Sherlock Holmes. He essentially wrote his own version fan fiction of it, and A.J. Raffles, which stands for Arthur, as in Arthur Conan Doyle, uh, and his sidekick Bunny are like robbers instead of detectives. They're just petty cracksmen, so they rob banks, they rob houses, and they're just good friends robbing houses, and it's so fun as a story, and I really enjoy that kind of lore of it. I really like Victorian settings, I like Gothic imagery, and just like people find a lot of queer themes in the original Sherlock Holmes novels, I see the same things and parallels in A.J. Raffles just because it's so heavily based on it. I've also read that A.J. Raffles and Bunny were loosely based off of or inspired by Oscar Wilde, mainly because he's very much an aesthetic criminal. He doesn't rob because he's not really rich. He's just kind of in it for being an aesthetic. And he's just kind of a very fascinating character to me. And it being public domain, I think there's a lot of fun you can have with it.
Hmm.
I'm big on genre stories and just kind of making a main character queer, making a main character trans, and integrating that into what could be a very fun mystery, a very fun heist, any sort of thriller. So those are main things that come to mind.
For my own answers, like if I'm doing the classic fairy tales, like Little Mermaid is already pretty transcoded. Pinocchio has some stuff there too, but like if I'm gonna do deep pull, like weird public domain fantasy stuff, I read about this classic fantasy book in Jeff Kripal's Mutants and Mystics recently. Most of us, when we think like the origins of science fiction, of like the staples of like uh robots, androids, spaceships, even like futuristic cars and stuff, or getting real specific, like psychedelic sci-fi substances that give you telepathic powers and communicating with giant warrior women or whatever. Like we attribute that to like Dune or Flash Gordon, or in some cases Star Wars. No, there's a book in 1871 that has all of that. Was unfortunately named The Coming Race and then renamed the only slightly less problematic Vril, The Power of the Coming Race. But like rather than outer space, because that wasn't like in the zeitgeist yet, this was a subterranean group that like had access to all this kind of futuristic technology, like including automobiles and other things like would soon become like very much a reality. But same with spaceships. There's like a group of ancient or like these giant warrior women, and like they telepathically bond with the men and like have this psychedelic substance that does this, and just like really wild stuff that like, yeah, I had no idea all these tropes went back to the 1800s before we even had the word for science fiction.
That's fantastic. Like Not only would that be a fantastic adaptation just because of how much you could play with, but just even from a looking into the background and like academic standpoint, like, yeah, what kind of world did this emerge from?
When I revisited Avatar before its sequel a couple years, sorry, the lame blue people one, not The Last Airbender, I was struck by how much of a trans narrative Avatar is. Like, this person getting a medical procedure to get more of a body he wants, using basically an internet avatar to connect with a bunch of other giant non-binary cat people, finding out you fit in a lot better there. Sex feels different and feels a lot better. There's both a horse girl and a dragon boy narrative, and it ends in a mech fight. That's all the staples of trans fiction, baby.
That is
And
trans fiction.
it ends with him transitioning into his like true body, and like that's beautiful. It just sucks it's in something that's like as kind of white saviory as Avatar is.
Colonizing white savior, yeah.
Not gonna die on this hill championing Avatar as a trans narrative. I just don't want that. I love James Cameron's work, but that ain't me.
The elements are there, though.
Like, if I can go back even further, I'm like, yes, this is probably problematic, but it was 1870, and hopefully some of this wasn't as charged, but I don't know, another time isn't an appropriate excuse. However, I can do whatever I want with this and make it as trans as I want. I can call it something else, but just, like, give it the credit where I need to. So I think there's a wealth of things to dive into there, and, like, I don't know, just knowing how much this would shape fiction and like shape things that would later get all the credit as like, oh, this is the OG science fiction thing. Like, no, there is another, and it's probably not very fun to read because it's from 1870, but I will put up with it just to make a trans retelling of it.
It's always so fun to find something from decades, if not centuries ago, and be like, what the hell were people thinking? And now as a writer, it is my playground because this thing has inspired me and in ways that the original author could not even imagine. That's so fascinating.
Bringing things to a close here, Algy, where can our listeners find you? And are there any other upcoming projects of your own or of Lifeline Comics you'd like them to be aware of?
Really, I would just direct people to the Ozma Kickstarter page and Lifeline's own website where you could find the other anthologies. It's a very queer-focused comic publisher, so you're going to see things like Transforium by Visibility that we've talked about, but other stories that are superhero or slice of life anime characters, just a lot of different genres of story that give meaningful queer representation that I appreciate. As you could see on the Kickstarter page, I'm really just linking myself back to my previous works. I don't really have much social media presence. The photo I use for my profile on the Ozma page is actually a portrait drawn by my partner because he is a skilled artist as well. So I would direct you to go see that because I appreciate that he worked hard on it.
Is he online anywhere as an artist?
No, we're both. So he's very unplugged and I'm just a lurker.
Yeah. You picked a right time to do that. So yeah, I don't like being online anymore so much.
I know.
And I do want to shout out Lifeline Comics. I saw that they're doing some comics work for the Comic Shop, which is like a TV project I also backed on Kickstarter. And like, oh, that's awesome. Worlds collide. And like, I can't think of a better team for like making comics in the world of this very inclusive comics TV show. So be on the lookout for whatever comes of that. I haven't read the blog post yet, if I'm being honest, but I'm very excited about the headline.
It's very exciting. It's such a new project for Lifeline as well. We're very excited to be working with them. They're a great team.
Please do remind our audience of the last day they can back Ozma, the Trans Witch of Oz.
Yes. It will be around a Thursday, so September 18th, I believe, is the last day that you have to back it. It should be joining our backer kit, though. So if you go to the page, you will be able to get some late pledges in later on, but definitely find us on Kickstarter.
And that's September 18th of 2025. So future listeners, adjust your time machines accordingly.
And there we go.
Thank you again, Algy, for taking the time to come on the show today, and also for getting me this excited about a book that I was already excited about. It's been really fun getting a chance to get this better understanding of Ozma as a character and her impact on like trans fiction for years to come. So yeah, very cool to see her reinterpreted through the Ever Afterverse.
Thank you for having me. Genuinely, always a pleasure. You always have very insightful questions, and I love trying to take the time to give the best answer I could. It is very meaningful and inspiring to me. It is a lot of work to put together a full graphic novel like this. It's always a lot of work to put together an anthology. So it's very nice to be in a space where people appreciate it and add to it with their own questions, thoughts, voices. Just always great talking to you.
I mean, I only got to read the first 7 pages, but you're killing it so far.
Thank you.
If the listeners at home have requests or recommendations for comics or creators you'd like us to cover in the future, you can send them our way on social media. You can find us on the Transcending Comics Instagram and Facebook page. You can find me on Blue Sky as @TommyTrimbath, or on Twitter, a website you should leave, as @Transcending Comics. Or you can always email us at transcendingcomics@gmail.com. I'd like to thank you again for giving our podcast a chance, and give a special shout out to Ray Day Parade for designing our logo. Our intro and outro music is A Little Soul and You've Been Starring by Carlson. You can check out more of his music on carlson.com. Join us again next time as we continue transcending boundaries and exploring the colorful world of trans, non-binary, and genderqueer representation in comic books of all kinds. As the curtains fall on this episode of Transcending Comics, remember that comics have the power to inspire change in countless worlds, including our own. Keep reading, keep writing, and keep transcending.